The award, what is this award about, and how did you get involved?
The Excellence in Caribbean Agricultural Journalism Award it came into being in an effort by organizations, regional organizations like CARDI and AICA, that were seeking to encourage journalists to do more features on agriculture, to put agriculture out there. So that was the plan, and they came together with the Association of Caribbean Media Workers and came up with this idea of the Excellence in Caribbean Journalism Awards. I'd actually never entered a competition in my life, ever, not in school, in university, never. But we have a boss who is always behind us and supporting us and harassing us a little bit. Okay, let me say that right again. Anyway. I'd actually prior to this never entered a competition for anything in my life, ever. But our boss, Clive Backus, was really behind all of us in the newsroom to participate, to take advantage of these opportunities, to submit pieces to not just this competition, but other journalism competitions in an effort to sort of, get our resume looking really healthy, to be able to say we won an award here, there, and so on. So it wasn't the first time he has hinted that that we should submit pieces. But what had happened is last year I actually had done a series. It was a short-lived series called The Agricultural Revolution, which came out of my observation that young people just weren't seeming to see agriculture as a viable career choice necessarily. And even when people in agriculture try to encourage them, they're still saying it along the lines of, there are other jobs in agriculture. There are, IT jobs and marketing jobs and media jobs in journalism. And I was thinking, yes, but that still is making it sound as though there's something wrong with the actual putting your hand in the dirt part of agriculture, which is really what it's about. And food security is a huge issue for us in the region. It's something I feel very passionately about. My father actually was in agriculture. He was an agronomist. And so I had actually approached or said in conversation to the then director, Mr. Ashton Stanley, agriculture is just not sexy enough. We need to get more attention to agriculture. So a couple of weeks later, he called me up. He said, can you come to a meeting at the agriculture department? And I showed up. He had all his people from his public relations department. He had brought in the people from the Government Information Service to a meeting and started the meeting by saying, Miss Frederick here thinks that agriculture isn't sexy enough. There's not enough attention on it. What can we do? And so we started brainstorming on ways to sort of, get agriculture out there, get people talking about it in the agriculture department. Mr. Stanley had invited all of the persons from their public relations department, some folks from the GIS, and said, look, Miss Frederick thinks that agriculture is not sexy enough, it's not getting enough attention, what can we do about it? So we started brainstorming, and my part of the commitment was that I would do a regular monthly feature, it turned out to be 15 minutes, called The Agriculture Revolution, just on some aspect of agriculture. The very first episode I did was actually with the now Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Timothy Harris, and we did the interview up at the old sugar factory, because we started at the end of the sugar era. So we're at the factory, sugar, talked a bit about the history of sugar and what was going to happen now in agriculture, that, sugar was gone. So that was how we started the segment. I thought it was quite a nice segment actually, but unfortunately the sound wasn't that good, it was a little windy. So anyway, that was the first segment, and I did several over the course of last year. And then we got tied up producing other programs last summer and then into the holiday season. So the show was short-lived, and I sure do hope to revive it. The good part was, of course, I had the segment sitting there ready to roll. So all I needed to do was send off a couple of them. Mind you, it did take Mr. Backus reminding me very regularly for several weeks. And I actually ended up submitting 2 pieces on the day of the deadline at about 3:45 in the afternoon. We get so busy here when FM, we get caught up. And I was just so relieved to have met the deadline that I was like, whew, okay. And I mean, that was the accomplishment for me, that I had met the deadline, and I forgot about it. So much so when a few weeks later I got this email from the president of the Media Association saying I had won. Of course, the first person I called was Mr. Backus, before I called any of my family or anything. I said, guess what, Clive? It was very exciting, because I'd never won anything before, as I said. It's also really exciting for me. The 2 other things that make it great. The other winners in the other segments, I won the best radio category, there was Best Print, Best TV, and Best Business Feature, which also happened to be a print. And the other 3 winners were all from the larger countries, Guyana, Trinidad, and Jamaica. So I was the only person from the OECS. That was very cool. And of course, also because agriculture raised me. My dad being an agriculturalist, he started his career in St. Kitts long before I was born. He was the estate manager at Bayford's estate. That's where my brother was actually born, on that estate. and we lived in Nevis. Well, before I was born, the Fredericks lived in Nevis, where he was a senior agricultural officer. And when they moved back to St. Kitts, I was actually born in a house right at the top of, just about past 5 ways, in a village. The house has a sign on it called Lanka Lodge. It's now, I think, the nurses, something to do with nursing. But at the time, it belonged to the agriculture department, well, the Sugar Manufacturing Corporation. And I was actually born in that house one fine Monday morning, many, many years ago. So there's something very cool about that. We did later move to Montserrat when I was a baby, and he was the director of agriculture there, and the house that we lived in was in the grounds of the compound of the agriculture department. So I mean literally, I grew up in agriculture, I grew up on an agricultural station, and so it's also very cool that my very first award is
agriculture.
in agriculture.
How does this award now makes you feel as a journalist, you know, working in the field for several years?
You know, I've got to tell you that in St. Kitts and Nevis, I'll be honest, a lot of people, you know, pay me compliments, and people think I'm an alright journalist, and that's very nice. But I'd never had a gauge of how I compared to other journalists in the region. I don't know, by St. Kitts and Nevis standards, you know, people think I'm pretty decent. But to go up against journalists from all over the Caribbean, from, you know, Guyana and Suriname up to Jamaica, it was pretty amazing that my little segment was selected. That feels tremendous. And I understand that there were quite a number of entries as well. So it's pretty amazing to, when you're put up against journalists from around the region, and some of them really seasoned journalists who have been at this a long time, to have been selected. And there's one thing I must mention. The piece that won, it would not have been what it was if it wasn't for Mr. Eric Brown from the Agriculture Department. He is he's the communications officer there, but he also is the officer who is in charge of promoting their backyard garden program. It was a segment on backyard gardens, and so much of the energy of that segment was because of his personality. I'm very chatty, you might have noticed. And he totally feeds off that. He's very engaging, he's very funny, and so I think our chemistry in discussing backyard gardening and my delight and his humor, just, I thought it made it come together really well. It wouldn't have won if it wasn't for his personality, and I wouldn't have won if my boss hadn't really egged me about getting it submitted. So to Mr. Clive Backus and Mr. Eric Brown, thank you very much for being part of Toni Frederick history.